8 ways to deal with an absentee landlord. The tenant/landlord relationship can be a precarious one. Regardless of whether it's managing a landlord who doesn't restore a person's calls or contending over what qualifies as an emergency, managing a deadbeat landowner can be a genuine battle. In any case, fortunately, there are approaches to deal with an unresponsive landowner while never involving a lawyer. Keeping in mind the end goal to bargain adequately with an absentee landowner, one ought to comprehend what most proprietors most esteem, clarifies Don Tepper, a real estate agent with Long & Foster in Alexandria, VA. What's more, that is a tenant who pays his or her rent on time and keeps up an easy-run property. Here are 8 approaches to manage a landowner who's often on team's MIA when a person requires them most. 1. Pay rent on time. A person like his paycheck to arrive twice every month, isn't that so? The same goes for a landowner, he or she needs to get paid. On the odd chance that the rent touches base on time, month in and month out, most landowners will be all the more obliging when there's an issue, says Tepper. That is genuine regardless of whether the landowner is absentee, yet considering that issues and repairs can be to a greater extent a bother for an owner who is absentee, convenient installment of rent can be particularly helpful and give tenant extra use when required. 2. Do an intensive investigation. Before tenant move in, examine the property here and there to ensure any previous harm isn't faulted for him. Josh Myler, chief of the private division at the agency in Los Angeles, says proprietor ought to guarantee the property is free of any material imperfections. All frameworks like the roof, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, in addition to apparatuses and machines, ought to be in great working condition before tenant move in and after he move out. Record everything with date stamped photographs, an exhaustive rundown of any issues forthright, and significantly consider having the archives legally approved. 3. Try not to sweat the small stuff, as in, requesting that landowner supplants things like high productivity lights. In any case, ensure tenant rent is amazingly evident on precisely what he as the tenant is in charge of before signing a rent. The owner likely is in charge of major repairs and issues, says Tepper. The tenant is most likely in charge of minor issues, for example, supplanting lights and, contingent upon the rent, some normal support going from cutting the yard to having the canals cleaned. Be particular with regards to major repairs as well. A stopped-up toilet is an issue, yet in the event that it's stopped up with a toilet a tenant's child dropped in. 4. Play detective in the event that tenant need to. Tenant ought to never need to find his landowner, however now and then things don't work out like he planned. Tenant landowner ought to give his or her contact data in the meantime the rent is signed, says Tepper. If not, the tenant should ask for it. On the odd chance that a tenant doesn't have that data, he or she should check with the nearby city or region tax assessor's office. Most contact data is accessible on the web. The tax assessor's office will have the address the tax bills are mailed to. This regularly will give the landowner's genuine address. Keep at the top of the priority list that if the property has been overseen by a similar organization for a considerable length of time, the tax bill might be sent to the administrative organization. 1 caveat. Keep paying rent while endeavoring to connect, as this may influence credit score on the odd chance that tenant stop, clarifies Matthew Kennedy, an authorized real estate agent for Coldwell Banker Burnett in Minneapolis, St. Paul, MN. 5. Know tenants' rights. This might be the most vital hint when managing an absentee landlord, particularly if tenant circumstance brings about legal action. A person's tenant rights will be illuminated both in his rent and in his neighborhood, city or area directions, says Tepper. Government law ensures against segregation based on race, religion, sex, familial status, or national root. over those securities. States, urban areas, or districts may incorporate others, for example, sexual orientation or marital status. Different laws and assurances will likewise fluctuate. For instance, the technique and calendar that must be taken after a mid-an eviction or the time by which a damaged deposit must be returned. Numerous urban communities and areas have an office of tenant or renters' rights that can prompt tenant on these issues. Landowners have an obligation to keep up the state of their rental properties and ought to be accounted for in the event that they are not doing as such, includes Kennedy. On the odd chance that tenant end up in a circumstance where tenant feel that his well-being and work are in danger, don't hesitate to contact his neighborhood lawyer general. They are there to offer assistance. Additionally, the Tenant Neighborhood Social Administration's office will have the capacity to offer him information and assets on the odd chance that tenant winds up in a lawful circumstance with his owner. They will have a rundown of lawyers that he can access in the event that he fit a bill for the lawful guide. 6. Be flexible. Yes, it might feel like the world is arriving at an end if the washing machine and rental unit breaks. In any case, actually, it's best to be to some degree adaptable, particularly with an absentee landowner. A decent landowner will buy the new clothes washer, pay for conveyance, and pay to have the old one expelled, says Tepper. In any case, if the landowner is 1,000 miles away, they can't physically meet the delivery individual. In which case, the tenant could be made a request to help encourage delivery in establishment, and it's to his greatest advantage to do such, particularly on the odd chance that tenant needs his proprietor to keep on resolving any extra upkeep issues rapidly. 7. On the odd chance that there's a management company, experience them first. On the odd chance that tenant lease, it's constantly perfect to have a rental organization go about as the middle person amongst tenant and his landlord. In any case, since that is not generally an alternative, it's best to talk about forthright what the best type of correspondence might be. What strategy for correspondence works best for the tenant and for the landowner? Email, phone, a web-based shape. The rent may determine the favored strategies for correspondence. If not, the landowner and tenant should make sense of what works best for them and set it in writing. 8. Set it in writing. While it might be most productive to get the telephone and call tenant's owner about an issue, it's constantly best to get it in composing. In case the tenant is informing the landowner of a difficult issue, compose or email regardless of the possibility that it's essential for a development, exhorts Tepper. On the odd chance that quite a possible tenant will require a record of the correspondence, the tenant will require a composed record. For free samples of probates, inherited, foreclosures, absentees landlord, vacant, code violations, evictions list visit www.realsupermarket.com.